Hail thee well and welcome all. I'm the Jake of all trades, and on this episode of the Master of Fun show, I'm going to be doing kind of like a follow-up video to one of the videos I had made a couple weeks ago, the Nat 20's Skill Checks and GM Authority video. I think I proposed some really interesting ideas and some facts that a lot of people didn't know, probably in that video, but I didn't really address how you might deal with some of the problems I presented. So, hey Spot, I'd like to do that now. So this is my cat Spot. Say hi, Spot. Hi, Spot. He's my cat, and he's getting tired of sitting in my lap right now, so I think I'm just going to kick him out. There you go. So today I want to talk about critical successes and critical failures a little bit more, and how they relate to skill checks, and what you as a game master can do in your game to make things flow a little more smoothly, make things a little more believable, and help immerse your players a little bit more. So if you'll stick with me, we'll get to that. The first thing on the agenda is to talk about the critical success and the critical failure. Where did those ideas come from? Well, they actually came from 3rd edition D&D. They were actually a product of the skill system that they put in place in that edition of the game. And it kind of assumes that if you roll a natural 20 on a critical, or on an attack check, or you make a roll a natural 20 on a saving throw, that you critically succeed that saving throw, which means that you crit hit and you crit succeed on that save, essentially. And a lot of things that people get wrong, though, of course, is that it did not apply to skill checks. I feel like I should reiterate that because it's kind of an important thing that that a lot of people assume that this applies to skill checks, but it doesn't. It's just attacks and saving throws, I'm pretty sure. Yes, it is. Before 3rd edition introduced the skill system, though, in like the 2nd edition and the 1st edition of the game, I'm pretty sure that each skill, depending on what you were trying to do, had its own chart and its own odds for success and stuff, and it had its own dice even that you had to roll. And I'm pretty sure that most of the time it wasn't a d20. A lot of the time it was a couple of d6, and depending on what number you got determines how well you succeeded on that task. So we have 3rd edition to thank for the d20 on the skill checks, because before that it was, I think it was just used exclusively for attacks and saving throws, which is why the natural 20 and the natural 1 only apply to those, I believe. I wasn't around at that time, and I've never played those early editions of the game, so I don't know for sure. This is just kind of my own personal musings on the idea. Now, don't take that a natural 20 and a natural 1 doesn't auto-success or auto-fail to mean that you can't auto-succeed or auto-fail on a skill check. I mean, obviously, if the DC is low enough, most common DCs for stuff that you do lie in like the 10 to 20 range, and so if you roll a natural 20 with your modifiers on top of that, there's a really good chance that you just succeeded on that very, very well. You know what I mean? You do the math behind that, and it just starts to add up. But, I mean, you compare that with the failure, though. There actually are rules for failures in 3rd edition D&D for skill checks. If you fail on a swim check by 4 or more, you are just barely able to, like, tread water. You don't make any progress. And if you fail by 5 or more, or 4 or less, I mean, and if you fail by 5 or more, then you actually start to sink in the water. And the same goes for if you're trying to climb like a surface, like a wall or something with a rope. If you're trying to climb, or maybe you're trying to climb a wall, you know, with just handholds. If you don't meet the DC then you don't make the progress. And if you fail it by 5 or more, then you actually fall. It literally says you just slip from where you are and you fell whatever distance you had just attained, which makes it kind of scary, actually. So at this point you might be thinking, well, hey, why do I even want to bother with this stuff? Why not just keep the natural 20 auto-success, natural 1 auto-fail thing in line? Well, for one thing, it adds a little bit of realism to your game if you start to do some of that math instead of just calling it as an auto-success or auto-fail. It allows your players not to just succeed on absurdly wild checks and do crazy things that they might be attempting in the world, especially if you have novice players. A lot of times they're trying to do, they're trying to steal from the local blacksmith and stuff, or trying to, haggle down one of the shopkeepers to just give them an item for free. And natural 20s can kind of mess with your perception of the world, which is very important if you're the game master. So this really helps kind of curb that problem if you're able to limit your players' success on some of those checks. And you say, well, even with a natural 20, the DC was so high that as a level 1 barbarian, no, you were not able to convince the shopkeeper to just give you this thing for free. The DC on that was like a 30 or 35 or something like that. So it helps rein your players in from doing that kind of stuff and keeping them more in line with what the feel of the game should be. It also prevents your players from failing at really easy stuff, especially stuff that they are very well skilled in. If they're very proficient in a skill, it's kind of unsatisfying when they roll a natural 1 on that skill, and you tell them like, "Oh, hey, you tried really good, but you didn't try hard enough," you know. But if you do the math for something like that, sometimes, if they have adequate ranks in a skill, a low DC check that should be pretty easy to succeed, they can still succeed that check. They don't have to fail it like they might otherwise fail it. And that kind of brings me to taking 10 and taking 20 on skill checks, which is also introduced in D&D 3E with the skill system. And it's I really wanted to mention this because I feel like it had a place in the last video, but I had forgotten to mention it, so I'm really glad that I thought of it while I was writing up the little thing for this video. But yeah, a lot of things, because also a lot of people aren't familiar with it. I haven't heard from it in a lot of gaming groups, from a lot of people, and I've forgotten even to mention it to my players a few times. So even though I'm aware of these rules and I am kind of like actually using them, my players aren't aware of them, and so they haven't been trying to utilize any of those. I should probably clear that up when I get the chance. But taking 10 and taking 20 are imply that you have you can succeed at a skill. You can get a 10 essentially. It's exactly what it says. So we'll start with the 10. Taking 10 on a skill means that you are not threatened. You're not rushed for time, and you can kind of just take your time and try to do this without having to roll a d20 and risking getting like a 2 or a 5 or something like that. Like, say you come across a locked chest in an abandoned mine shaft or something like that. There's no one around. There's no one around because you killed all of the bad guys that were already in here, but now there's this locked chest that you didn't have time to deal with. Well, now you can sit back and you can take a 10 on that if you want to, and then you just have to take a you take a 10. You treat it as if you had rolled a d20 and you got a 10. That's just the average between a 1 and a 20 essentially. So that's what they're doing there. And you can just assume that you take a 10, and then you can add all of the applicable modifiers to that. Add your disabled device modifiers to that 10, and then if it beats the DC of the lock of the chest, which is probably only going to be like a 15 or a 20, if you're an experienced rogue or lockpick of some kind, you're probably going to be able to beat that with a 10. And it allows you to, avoid risking like rolling a 2 or something and then setting off a trap. And it's kind of nice like that. Now, taking a 10 assumes that you're only still taking one attempt at this skill check. Taking a 20, on the other hand, assumes that you are taking multiple checks against this object, this DC, essentially. Whatever you're trying to do, climb this wall, unlock this chest, whatever it is, light the campfire, you're taking multiple checks to try to do this. And the assumption when you are doing taking a 20, and this is just like taking a 10, you are assuming that, hey, instead of taking a 10, I'm going to take a 20. But it sounds really nice, right? You're like, oh, hey, I get to automatically take a 20 as on a d20 and then add all my modifiers. That sounds like a pretty sweet deal. Well, it is, but there's very limited circumstances in which it can be applied. You cannot be, like all of the circumstances for taking a 10, you can't be rushed, you can't be threatened, and you also, there can't be any consequences for failure on the skill check. So if you're trying to like climb over like a 10-foot wall or something like that, there's probably not any failures if you fail to do that, any consequences. And so you can take a 20, and it assumes that eventually, if you roll enough times, you're going to get a 20, and you're going to be able to climb over that wall, which has a DC of like 15 or something like that, even if you don't have ranks in the skill. And I guess I was a little incorrect before when I said that it doesn't have any consequences, or it can't have any consequences. It can have consequences, but you will suffer those consequences if you take a 20, because it's assuming that you are going to roll a bunch of lower numbers before you get that 20, and so you're going to fail on that check before you succeed on it, and so you're going to have to suffer those consequences. But even in that situation, if you know there's a dart trap loaded in that chest, and you know it's only got one use in it, maybe, from whatever kind of check that you might have made before, perception check perhaps, you know that, okay, I'll trip this and it'll try to poison me, but it's only going to happen the one time, and then after that, it's just a matter of getting that lock picked. Well, you could be like, oh yeah, I'll take that 20 on that lock, even though there's a little booby trap. I'll take that damage, and I'll try to make that fortitude save, but after that, I'm just going to, try to pick this lock. So let's talk about why you might want to use this mechanic in your game if you aren't already. Well, taking a 10 or taking a 20, that option for your players, that saves a lot of time. Pretty much just because there's not going to be nearly as many die rolls. If they're setting up camp for the night and they want to go out hunting or foraging for food, roll a survival check, they can just say, hey, I take a 10, I add my modifiers, that gives me like a 16 or an 18. I find enough food for everybody. That can be very nice. It's very nice for your players to reach like a kind of a plateau where they're like, hey, we don't have to really worry about this stuff as much anymore because we're so skilled at it that we can just take a 10, kind of take our time with it, and we can do it no problem. We can, fend for ourselves. We can take care of this business. But another reason that you might want to use it is that it kind of gives your PCs a chance to relax their guard a little bit without any negatives for them. Like, there's no negatives to using this system for your players at all. It's just a benefit for them and for their characters to interact with the world and to succeed at the things that they should succeed at reasonably. So they don't always have to worry about failing a skill check if they can take a 10 on it, or if they can take a 20 on it, if they have the time. That's really nice for them. It saves them a lot of time. It saves them a lot of stress. They don't have to worry so much about the little things. They don't have to worry about every single die roll that they're going to be throwing. They just have to worry about the important ones, the ones in combat, like it should be. So you may be asking, like, well, what should I do now? Knowing all of this stuff, how should I treat natural 20s and natural 1s in my game? Well, here's a few possible solutions for you, if you're inclined to look at the rules and try to pay attention to them, that is. So the first solution is just to kind of roll with it. If it feels like under the circumstances that a natural 20 should be like a critical success of some kind, or an automatic success at the least, then just go with it. Be like, oh yeah, that wasn't a very difficult check, or maybe you have a lot of ranks in that skill, and so a natural 20 added with all of that, it's no question. Of course, you succeed on that. And the same goes with a natural 1. Just read the situation and see whether or not a natural 1 you think would imply an automatic failure for that character, or whether they might struggle with the task but not make progress, or wrestle with it and then finally overcome it, that sort of thing. So just kind of roll with it, if you pardon the pun. The second option you have is to do the math. You can just sit down and count out those rolls, set those DCs, and see whether or not they match up. And if they don't, then hey, that's too bad for your players. They'll have to think of something else that they can do. And it makes for a more believable world, and for not just the world, but also the gameplay as well is a lot more believable. Because as I said, it doesn't allow your players to get away with that crazy stuff. They have to have some reasonable chance of success before they can try to make a skill check a natural 20 does not automatically assume. Let's go back to that barbarian and the blacksmith. Like a natural 20, like if you don't got the ranks, you don't got the ranks. That's all there is to it. So a third option, though, another option that you could use is, this is actually one that I've been thinking about implementing myself for a little while. I think it would be a pretty easy transition for pretty much any D20 system that you might be using. Any D&D system, Pathfinder included, actually, considering it's actually coming from Pathfinder. It's coming from Pathfinder 2nd edition. I read about this in the playtest rules, or I heard about it somewhere. But they have a thing for critical successes and critical failures, where natural 20s are automatically a critical success, even on skill checks, and natural 1s are an automatic failure, even on skill checks. And I thought that was a lot of fun, but they kind of extended it further than that. They also said that not only is it a natural 20 that's a critical success, but any success that is the 10 plus the DC or more, essentially. So if the DC for climbing that stone wall we were talking about is 15, and you rolled like a 30 with all of your modifiers, or you rolled like a 19 plus 10 or something like that. You got a 29 to climb that 15 wall. Well, you just critically succeeded climbing over that wall, even if you didn't get a natural 20. So that's a really interesting thing, and that applies to combat as well and saves, I believe. So if you're in combat and you score a really high hit against a guy, maybe you have you rolled a 17 plus your bonuses, and you're like, oh man, that's outside my critical range, but I know I knocked that guy's head around. DM's like, well, yeah, you did. You beat his armor class by 12, actually, so that's a critical hit now. Go ahead and roll double damage for that. That's a lot of fun. It makes it a lot more interesting for the players, and it makes it a lot more dynamic as well. It makes it more interesting outside in role playing too. If it applies to skill checks as well, there's the dynamic that you're looking for. There's that critical success, critical failure thing, and they even have a set of rules to kind of accompany it. And that kind of means, I think in their system, a natural 20 is always a critical success, even if it's not the DC plus 10. With your modifiers, but I might adjust that to be like, okay, well, I'll play it like if you have to beat the DC still, you have to beat it by 10 before it can be considered a critical success. Maybe that works well for skills. I think inside combat, you still want to give your players that opportunity to score a critical hit, even if the guy's AC is ridiculously high. So that's just food for thought. Anyway, the last thing that you can do is to just ignore all of this stuff and keep playing it the way you have been playing it. I think that it's perfectly acceptable. It's been a lot of fun. It's playing with natural 20s as auto successes and natural 1s as auto failures on skill checks. It's the way that I was introduced to the game, and it was part of what made it so engaging for me when I was first starting out. Knowing that I had a chance of succeeding on these ridiculous things if I just, well, maybe there's that one chance, there's that 5% chance that I roll really well, and then I can do that crazy thing that I would otherwise have no possible way of doing. That's kind of fun for your players. And it's also fun for you when they start rolling natural 1s, and you get to describe how epically they failed at what they just tried to do. Or, better yet, when they begin to describe to you how they epically failed at trying to do that thing. So yeah, I mean, just ignore all this stuff if you're not into it. I think it's perfectly fine. I think it runs. I don't think it breaks the game. It just makes it a little less believable from a world points perspective. That these low level people can just do crazy things if they do get roll well enough. It just kind of unbalances things and makes it a little loopy. But if that's the kind of thing that you're going for and that's the kind of thing you're used to, it might be a good deal for you. Keep with it. Anyway, I think that's all I have for this episode. So I thank you all so much for listening this long, and I certainly hope that I'm going to see you all again very soon.